I didn't realize my career was collapsing until the moment my boss smiled at me. The kind of smile people use right before they push you off a cliff. If you've ever worked in an office where the wrong person gets power, you know that smile. It's quiet, calculated, almost gentle. And that morning, when Carter called me into his glass-walled office, I felt something shift in my stomach, like the floor had tilted a degree too far. I'd spent 6 months building the most ambitious project of my career, a workflow automation system that could save our department millions a year. 6 months of late nights, early mornings, weekends spent debugging instead of sleeping. You know that strange pride you get when something finally works, even if nobody else will ever understand how. That was me, and for a while I thought Carter understood that. He'd praised it, bragged about it to upper management, pretended like he had been guiding me the whole way. Then he hired him, the favorite, the new guy, the one with the crisp haircut, polished accent, and absolutely zero experience with the systems we used. His name was Tyler, 29 MBA, perfect teeth, family and consulting, and the kind of confidence that made you think he'd never once been told no. You could see the connection between him and Carter within 10 minutes. Tyler laughed at every joke. Carter soaked it up. Tyler offered ideas that were just rearranged copies of mine. Carter called him promising. It didn't take long before my boss started referring to my project as our initiative. By our, he meant his glory, Tyler's credit, my work. I kept my head down. I wasn't trying to pick a fight. I just wanted to finish what I'd built. But the real problem started 2 days before everything exploded. We were in the conference room reviewing the latest sprint results. I presented the update as always. Walked through performance metrics, integration notes, rollout timeline. Carter sat at the head of the table, nodding with that same rehearsed interest he'd been using for years. Tyler sat next to him, taking notes on a tablet like he was documenting a historical moment. When I finished, the room was quiet for half a beat. Then Carter said, "Great work, Ethan. Really. But moving forward, I think it's time for you to hand the project over." I tried to swallow, but my throat locked up. "Hand it over to who?" "To Tyler," he said, not even glancing at me. "He'll manage it from here. He has the leadership background." I must have misunderstood. "You want him to manage the integration?" "No," Carter said softly. "I want you to transfer everything. Full ownership, documentation, code, access, the entire package." I looked around the room expecting someone to laugh or gasp, or at least blink like this was insane. But everyone stared at their laptops. Nobody wanted to be caught taking my side. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Carter, with respect, Tyler doesn't know the architecture. He hasn't touched a single line of—" "That's enough," he cut in, still calm. "This is what's happening. You'll transition everything by Friday." My pulse hammered in my ears. This project is my work, my responsibility. You can't just— "It's a company project," he said sharply, "which means it's my decision." Tyler shifted in his chair, pretending to look uncomfortable, but the corner of his mouth twitched like he'd been waiting for this moment. Carter continued, "Let's not make this difficult." Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just a thin, quiet break. 6 months of work, 6 months of pressure, 6 months of believing the results mattered more than the politics. I breathed in slowly. "No," I said, "I'm not handing it over." Carter finally lifted his eyes to meet mine. His expression didn't change. "That's unfortunate," he said, "because if you refuse the transition, you refuse your role." "And if I refuse my role?" I asked. He leaned back, relaxed, like he'd been waiting to say the next words. "Then you're done here." For a moment, everything in the room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the AC felt silent. There's a particular kind of humiliation that comes when you realize how little your effort weighs against someone else's ego. It's not dramatic. It's just empty. I stood, closed my laptop slowly, and felt every pair of eyes avoid mine. "Then I guess I'm done," I said. But that was just the beginning. Most people imagine getting fired as a loud scene. Shouting, broken chairs, someone knocking the coffee over. Mine wasn't like that. Mine felt more like being erased. One moment, I existed. The next, Carter's words rewrote the room around me. I walked out of the conference room with my laptop under my arm and the kind of silence following me that meant everyone had heard, but nobody would ever admit it. No one lifted their eyes. It was the same hallway I'd walked 1,000 times, but suddenly it felt foreign, like someone else's workplace, someone else's life. My badge tapped red at the elevator. Not deactivated, just lagging. But somehow that made it worse. It felt like the building itself was deciding whether it still recognized me. I rode down alone, staring at my reflection in the metal doors. I didn't look angry. I looked embarrassed, like I'd let myself believe merit mattered. My jaw was tight, but not because I was holding back rage. It was the humiliation, the quiet kind that settles under your ribs and tells you misread every room you've ever been in. The elevator opened to the lobby. My badge still worked there, for now. I walked toward my desk, heart beating slow and heavy. People glanced up only when they thought I wasn't looking. A coworker who'd once asked me to review his code pretended to scroll through his emails with monk-like concentration. Another rearranged her coffee cups like they'd suddenly become urgently important. It's funny, the things people do when they're scared of guilt by association. I sat down at my workstation. My hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to do. I wasn't allowed to continue working, but I also couldn't just sit there. That frozen middle ground, that's the part nobody prepares you for. The moment where your job is already gone, but your body hasn't caught up to the fact. I opened my drawer and started gathering the small, stupid things people accumulate in offices. A pen with half the ink gone. A stress ball I'd never squeezed. A notebook with unreadable debugging scribbles. I unplugged my charger and wrapped the cord neatly, because neatness was the only control I had left. "Ethan," a voice behind me. Soft, hesitant. I turned. It was Karen from finance. Someone I'd worked with for years. She looked like she wanted to say something comforting, but had forgotten how. "I'm really sorry," she whispered. I nodded. I appreciated the attempt, even if she was already backing away, like she might get burned by being too close to me. Across the room, I could see Tyler hovering near Carter's office, pretending not to watch. That small, smug tilt of his head made something tighten painfully in my chest. I dropped my badge onto my desk. The sound was small, but it echoed. I walked out without looking back. The parking lot felt too bright, like the sun was indifferent to the fact that my life was unraveling in broad daylight. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slow enough to keep my thoughts from collapsing into each other. Anger would have been easier. Fury has momentum, but all I felt was a muted, steady ache. On the drive home, my mind replayed the moment over and over. Not the firing itself, but my refusal. The point where I said no. That word had weight now. It didn't feel like defiance anymore. It felt like a fault line. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, staring at the blank surface like it might tell me what to do next. I pulled up my employment contract, partly out of spite, partly because I didn't know what else to do. I expected corporate boilerplate, clauses written in dense legal fog, warnings about proprietary information, all the usual traps. But near the middle, buried in a paragraph I'd skimmed 1,000 years ago when I first signed, I noticed something strange. Any intellectual property developed by the employee outside of company hours and outside of company premises using personal equipment shall remain the sole property of the employee. I read it twice, then 3 times. A slow, unfamiliar feeling crept into my chest. Something sharp and quiet, like the first breath you take after being underwater too long. My project had lived on my home computer for 5 months before any of it touched the company server. I'd built the backbone at night, on weekends, correcting things on my own machine long before Carter ever saw a draft, which meant something impossible, something dangerous, something I hadn't let myself consider until that moment. The work Carter thought belonged to the company didn't, not legally, not even close. I sat back in my chair. The ache in my chest shifted just a little, replaced by a thin thread of clarity I hadn't felt all day. I wasn't powerless. Not completely. Not yet. Outside, a car passed. The kitchen hummed with its refrigerator. The world kept moving. And for the first time since Carter fired me, I felt myself move with it. But I didn't know then just how far the fallout would reach. That realization would come later, and it would change everything. For the first 48 hours after discovering the IP clause, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious. Anxiety had burned itself out earlier, in the parking lot, in the elevator, in the silence of my old desk. What filled the space now was something steadier, cleaner, focus. I dug through every version of my project. Early sketches, rough builds, the original prototype I'd written one weekend while sitting at my kitchen counter with takeout and too much coffee. It was all there, time-stamped, saved, backed up. Every major function, every foundational module. Mine. The company only had the polished version, the shell, the skin, but the nervous system, the real innovation, lived entirely on the machine in front of me. And it was protected by the very contract Carter never bothered to read. Irony has a sense of humor. The next week felt like stepping into a different life. No morning meetings, no Carter, no forced smiles at Tyler, just me, my code, and a growing sense that I was finally building something for myself. I didn't try to rebuild the company version, I built something better. I reworked the architecture, cleaned up the logic, redesigned the workflow engine so it could scale 3 times faster with half the resources. I incorporated features I'd wanted to add for months, but had been told were too complex for the timeline. I was no longer bound by anyone's timeline but my own. Late at night, I'd sit back in my chair and look at the new interface glowing on my monitor. Cleaner, smarter. It didn't belong to the company. It didn't belong to Carter. It didn't belong to anyone who would ever misuse it out of ego or office politics. It belonged to the person who built it. On Thursday, I received an email from an old client, someone I'd worked with for years, someone who respected results more than office gossip. He'd heard I wasn't at the company anymore and wanted to know if I could consult on a workflow problem they'd been facing. I almost laughed at the timing. We met the next morning at a small cafe near their office. He arrived with 2 other executives, the kind who wore crisp suits, but didn't bother pretending they weren't exhausted. They explained their issue. I listened. Then I showed them a stripped-down version of what I'd built. Nothing proprietary to the old company, nothing risky. Just enough to demonstrate capability. The room shifted. Their eyes sharpened. Their posture changed. "How soon can this be implemented?" one of them asked. "Soon," I said. "I'm forming my own firm." It wasn't a lie. The thought had barely existed an hour earlier, but when I said the words out loud, something clicked into place. The idea felt natural, inevitable, like I had been walking toward it without knowing. They exchanged glances. "When you're ready," the lead exec said, "call me. We're interested." When I left the cafe, the air tasted different. Meanwhile, my old company wasn't doing well. I wasn't trying to keep tabs, but news finds you when people know injustice happened. Former co-workers began messaging me quietly, cautiously, like spies passing notes. Tyler had taken full control of the project, except he didn't understand it at all. Key files were missing, the ones I had created at home. Integration kept failing. Clients were growing impatient. Carter held emergency meetings, raised his voice, blamed the team. Productivity cratered. Deadlines collapsed. A rollout scheduled for the end of the month had been pushed twice already. One coworker wrote, "This whole place feels like a sinking ship." Another, "Tyler is drowning and Carter won't admit it." And then something unexpected happened. A major enterprise client, the biggest the company had, pulled out of their upcoming contract renewal. Millions vanished in a day. The board scheduled an emergency review. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. It just confirmed what I'd known for months. You can't build a structure on favoritism and expect it to hold. 2 weeks later, the same client that walked away from Carter signed a long-term development agreement with my new firm. It was surreal. My old project had been meant to support them, but the version Carter kept was now obsolete. Half finished, missing its core. The version I built for myself left theirs in the dust. Suddenly, everything moved fast. A small team formed around me. 2 contractors I trusted, one former co-worker who left the company quietly and asked to join, and the same executive who met me in the cafe. We worked long hours, but they were good hours. Honest hours. Nobody was trying to steal credit. Nobody was playing favorites. The work mattered, again. My firm launched with a modest website and a product better than anything my old employer could salvage. Within a month, inquiries poured in, and with each successful deployment, the cracks in Carter's facade widened. Then came the audit. An investor leaked concerns that the failure of the project, my project, stemmed not from technical issues, but from mismanagement. The board launched a full internal investigation. People who'd been too scared to speak earlier suddenly remembered details. Emails surfaced, communication logs, decisions that made no sense until favoritism was factored in. Carter was no longer a confident leader. He was a liability. The day he was removed as project lead, someone sent me a message. They brought him out of the boardroom. He looked small. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Smallness wasn't new for him. It was just finally visible. By then, my system had already outperformed expectations for 2 new clients. My firm was growing, my life was moving, and I felt a calm I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years. They thought firing me was the end of the story. It wasn't even close. Not yet. The morning everything finally settled, nothing dramatic happened. There were no fireworks, no big speeches, no cinematic slow motion, just a quiet office, a cheap coffee machine humming in the corner, and the soft clatter of keyboards that belonged to people who actually wanted to be there. Our office wasn't much to look at. 3rd floor, end of the hall, windows that overlooked a parking lot instead of a skyline. But it was ours. We'd crammed 2 desks more than the room could reasonably hold. Whiteboards lined the walls, and there was a permanent smell of dry erase markers and takeout. It didn't look like success. It looked like work. For the first time in a long time, that was enough. I got in early, like always. Old habit. The sun was just clearing the tops of the buildings, washing the room in the kind of pale light that made everything look honest. I unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and did what I'd been doing every day for months now. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and checked overnight logs. No surprise fires, no panicked messages, just healthy metrics, and a new email from a client saying, "This update saved us a full day this week." I read it twice, not because I didn't believe it, but because I still wasn't used to praise landing without a "but" attached to the end. By 9, the team started trickling in. Sam dropped his backpack near his chair, muttered something about traffic, and smiled when he saw the graphs on the monitor. "Servers still alive?" he asked. "Still alive," I said. "Still smarter than half the managers I used to know." He laughed, sat down, and immediately got absorbed in a ticket he'd been chasing the day before. Lena came in 5 minutes later, hair in a messy bun, clutching a thermos like it was life support. She waved her phone at me. "You seen this yet?" she asked. "No. What is it?" She tossed it gently onto my desk. A news snippet was open on the screen. Some business site I never bothered reading when I was at the old company. The headline hit me first. Regional software firm announces leadership restructuring after failed rollout. The article wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. It mentioned missed deadlines, a critical client walking away, internal investigation findings about questionable delegation practices, and over-reliance on unproven management. It didn't name Carter directly until the third paragraph, but when it did, it didn't spare him. Chief Technology Officer Carter Hale has been removed from his position effective immediately and will no longer serve in an executive capacity. The board cites strategic misalignment and breakdown in project oversight as key factors. There it was, the fall, cleaned up in corporate language but obvious between the lines. "Thought you'd want to see," Lena said quietly. I handed the phone back. I didn't feel the rush of vindication I'd imagined months ago when I was packing my box under fluorescent lights. No spike of adrenaline, no fantasy monologue, just closure. "Thanks," I said. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I replied, and this time I meant it. Around lunch, I got a LinkedIn notification. It was almost funny how predictable it was. "Carter Hale has viewed your profile." A few minutes later, a connection request popped up, followed by a message. "Ethan, seems we've both had some changes lately. I think we should talk. There may be opportunities to collaborate, given your new position and my experience. No hard feelings from my side. Business is business. See." I stared at the message for a long moment. The old version of me, the one who stayed late, apologized for other people's mistakes, tried to prove his worth to men like him, might have replied, might have agreed to meet, to listen, to give Carter a chance to explain. This version didn't. I archived the message and declined the request. No reply. No speech. No second audition. Business may be business for him. For me, it's also memory. In the weeks that followed, small pieces of his downfall reached me like background noise. Someone mentioned he was consulting independently now. Someone else said he'd tried to land with a competitor, but the audit report followed him like a shadow. Favoritism looks fine until the results hit the financials. After that, it's a stain. I didn't chase the details. I didn't need them. The story had already played out where it mattered. What did matter was this. Our firm signed 3 more clients. We hired a junior dev who reminded me uncomfortably of myself at 24. Too earnest, too eager, still believing good work always speaks for itself. I taught him code, but I also taught him something I'd learned the hard way. Document everything. Protect your time. Don't give your name away to people who only remember it when there's credit to collect. On Fridays, we started a small tradition. When a deployment went well, we'd order cheap pizza, drag chairs into a semicircle, and sit around talking about everything except work for an hour. Nobody was scared to laugh too loud. Nobody was scared to disagree. Nobody was trying to impress someone upstairs. There wasn't an upstairs. One evening, after everyone had left, I stayed behind to finish a few small things. The office was dark except for my monitor. The code on the screen didn't look like revenge. It didn't look like a weapon. It looked like what it always should have been. A solution. My solution. The contract that once tied me to a place that didn't value me was now the same contract that protected what I'd made. Carter had used his power to try to strip me of my work. He'd counted on fear, on habit, on the assumption that I'd roll over the way so many people do just to keep a paycheck. He miscalculated one thing. He thought the project was the prize. It wasn't. The prize was learning exactly how far I'd go to keep my dignity intact, and realizing I could build something better once I stopped pouring all my energy into proving myself to people who'd already decided how little I was worth. Sometimes, people ask, when they hear the short version of the story, if I ever think about going back, if the old company offered me a huge salary and a title, would I take it? Would I stand in the same building, walk the same hallway, just with a bigger office and more control? No, not because I'm bitter. I'm not. Not anymore. Because I remember what it felt like to stand in that conference room, with my work on the screen and my boss already planning how to give it to someone who hadn't earned it. I remember packing a cardboard box while people pretended not to see. I remember reading that one clause in the contract and realizing the only person who'd ever protected my work was me. You don't go back to a place that taught you your worth by trying to erase you. You move forward. Now, my mornings are simple. I unlock a door with my own key. I drink bad coffee from a mug nobody else will use. I look around a room full of people who own their mistakes and share their wins. When a client praises the system, they're praising the team, and the team knows exactly who built what. I don't need my name on a plaque. I don't need an ego stroke in a meeting. I just need this. A life where the person with the most power over my work is the person who actually did it. In the end, Carter didn't take my project. He didn't take my future. He just forced me to choose a side, his comfort or my self-respect. I chose myself, and for the first time in a long time, that choice actually feels like winning.